This is something that ought not to occur. After months of planning, a prospective king enters a family summit. Windsor for a private meeting. Every important person in the room was there to help resolve a matter that the family had been debating for a year. He also cancels it. Not midway through, not after a disagreement, and not before anyone had taken a seat in less than a minute. And because there was only one person in the room, he accomplished it by all accounts. Someone who wasn't invited. Someone whose presence instantly revealed to William that this meeting was not what he had been promised it was. It was Camilla's personal attorney. William turned around and ended the whole thing as soon as he realized who she was. The reason a single lawyer in a room can blow up a royal summit is the most revealing thing about how this family really operates. So hit subscribe before we continue. And it's the part that no one is explaining. My name is Harold, and on this channel, I dissect tales that start out as a single, dramatic headline to reveal the underlying mechanisms. In reality, who was in the room? What was the purpose of the paperwork? Everyone missed this stealthy move. And by the time you finish this one, you'll comprehend something that initially seems unattainable. The safest course of action William could take when dealing with that attorney was to ensure that no meeting took place at all. Because sometimes denying the opposing side access to the room is your most effective strategy. Allow me to explain what this Windsor summit was. Because the word summit requires a lot of work, you must be aware of its significance. A summit is not a conversation in this family. It's an uncommon, intentional, meticulously organized event. The kind where you only get together when all other options have been exhausted and a real problem needs to be fixed. And there is a legitimate precedence for precisely this. The family held what the media dubbed the Sandringham Summit in January 2020 after Harry and Meghan said they were taking a step back. In one room, Charles, William, Harry, and the late Queen worked out the conditions of the departure. That was true. It was extensively publicized and established the standard. When existential stakes are involved, you gather everyone in one room and resolve the issue directly. As a result, everyone who knew the family recognized the signal when word spread that a Windsor meeting was being planned. A major decision was being made. The future was the topic of discussion this time. In particular, what happens to specific agreements and the structure of the family after Charles's rule ends. Additionally, you must keep the background in mind because it is what gave this summit a sense of urgency rather than routine. Early in 2024, Charles received a cancer diagnosis. That is true. The palace made that announcement. Additionally, even though he is still undergoing therapy, the diagnosis drastically altered the family's mental climate. All of a sudden, questions about the future, who controls what, and where specific individuals stand after the reign changes hands have become ambiguous. They ceased to be theoretical questions. They bought a clock. Before we proceed, a little note. I write a free weekly letter about everything I find that doesn't fit into these videos. Music, visit crownletter.com to join over 10,000 royal insiders. The pinned comment below contains the URL. Simply aim your phone at the QR code displayed on your TV. And nothing keeps a family focused like an unstoppable clock when they have a lot to lose. This summit was the result of that pressure. It's a deeper, more subdued catastrophe rather than one that makes headlines. The feeling that the window of opportunity to resolve some issues was about to close. And consider why Windsor in particular, as the location itself was a decision of deep significance. This family can use a variety of stages, each of which conveys a distinct message. A meeting held at Buckingham Palace is official, state-related, and documented. Charles's home ground, Clarence House, is the venue for meetings. However, Windsor is the family's ancestral home, steeped in generations of personal history, and the location they turn to when they want something to feel more like family than government. Intimacy was the decision to choose Windsor. It said, "This is family, not an institution. Come not as a competitor, but as a son." You will realize that the framing was not innocent. Because your guard lowers the more a room is decorated to feel like a family. And the whole idea was to lower the guard. Thus, the summit is organized. A guest list, a date at Windsor, and months of preparation. The guest list tells the complete tale. So now is where I want you to slow down. Additionally, very few people closely examine guest lists. It was skillfully presented as a family discussion with senior family members and a few of the most dependable household advisors. The kind of event where issues are discussed casually, one-on-one, before anything is ever codified. Because it instructs everyone on how to act when they enter, that framing is important. A family discussion is informal. It's not on the record. No one is on guard. It's family talk, so you say stuff you wouldn't write down. The meeting was intended to create that kind of environment. Friendly, casual, and trustworthy. And this is a detail that is worth keeping in mind since it becomes crucial. According to sources, William had received a copy of the guest list ahead of time, as is customary before such an event, and that lawyer's name was not on it. She had either been secretly added after the deadline, or not included at all. Thus, the strategy relied on William being unaware of her presence until he entered the room. Consider what you can learn from that. You would include her on the list if her presence was harmless and she was there for a typical, ethical purpose. You reveal the innocuous stuff. The things that only work when the other person doesn't see them coming are hidden. The fingerprint of intent is the sheer fact that she was excluded from the list. Someone realized that William would never enter if he knew a private attorney would be there. They therefore made sure he wouldn't find out until it was too late. However, he saw her before he sat down, so it wasn't too late. William then entered and noticed someone standing close to the window who had no place in a family discussion. The person who represents Camilla's private interests is her own attorney, not a palace legal advisor who works for the organization. And since this is the pivotal point on which the entire narrative rests, I need you to comprehend why that one detail changed everything. A family discussion and a court case are very different. And this is precisely what distinguishes them. A lawyer's presence. It is no longer a conversation when a private attorney enters the room. A negotiation is taking place. Anything that is spoken can be witnessed, recorded, and recalled. A casual nod of approval becomes something a lawyer might later refer to as permission, rather than just a friendly family gesture. William immediately realized that he had been lured into a space that was disguised as one thing in order to produce another as he glanced at the woman near the window. And since it's the most amazing part of the entire narrative and it ends quickly, I want you to truly experience the speed of that recognition. The majority of individuals would have seen the stranger's face and ignored it if they had entered a cozy family room. Someone's assistance, a new advisor, an aide, who knows. Since warmth is meant to make you do so, most individuals give others the benefit of the doubt. In one look, William accomplished the exact opposite. He recognized a face, not the palace's, but Camilla's own attorney, music, and his brain performed the entire computation in a moment. Here during a family meeting, her attorney is standing quietly off to the side and isn't on the list. Each of those facts can be explained separately, but when combined, they form a single word: bargaining. No one had to inform him. The agenda didn't need to be heard. The agenda was the unexpected appearance of that particular individual in that particular job. Before he had entered the room 3 steps, he had read the entire summit off one face. That man has experienced enough burns to have a true sixth sense of what a trap looks like. It also reveals how these two sides, music, now perceive one another, doesn't it? Because William must have lost all faith in order to discern the worst intentions from a single glance. He didn't consider the possibility of a harmless explanation. He didn't hesitate. He immediately assumed that he was being played by the music. Furthermore, the fact that he was correct is essentially irrelevant. What it demonstrates is a relationship so hollowed out that the presence of a lawyer is interpreted as a confirmed ambush on site rather than as a chance to be checked. There are no conflicts in that household. One half of that family now believes the other is constantly working a covert angle. And once you make that assumption, every room becomes one that needs to be checked for traps. William has gotten to a stage where he can't stroll into his own family's gathering without examining it like a chessboard. Whatever else you think of him, that is a lonely way to have to live. William looked at that woman by the window and understood instantly that he had been invited into a room disguised as one thing in order to produce another. And that's the answer to the question the headline leaves hanging. Why cancel? Why not just sit down and see what happens? Because William grasped something most people would have missed in the moment. That the trap wasn't in what would be said. The trap was the room itself. If he sat down, if he engaged, if he let the family conversation proceed with that lawyer quietly present, then whatever came out of it, any softening, any apparent agreement, any moment where he seemed to go along with something to keep the peace, could later be framed as his consent, witnessed by counsel. The only way to defeat a trap built out of a room is to refuse the room. So he did. He didn't debate. He didn't demand explanations in front of everyone. He simply said the meeting would not be going ahead, and he left. And in doing so, he took away the one thing. The entire exercise depended on him in a chair on the record. Now, before we get to what that lawyer was actually there to do, music, because that's the real payoff, and it's worth the wait. Let me connect this to something, because a lot of you are going to feel the echo. Last week, I walked you through the Raven's Mere estate. How a forgotten legal folder, a document nobody had read in decades, quietly decided the fate of a 12,000-acre estate, and how the presence of lawyers in a family room turned a warm assumption into a cold reckoning. And so many of you said the same thing in the comments, that this family's real battles aren't fought with arguments, they're fought with paperwork, and the person who controls the documents controls the outcome. Well, here it is again. And this time, William had clearly learned the lesson. Because a man who has watched what a single quiet legal instrument can do does not walk casually into a room where a private lawyer is waiting. He'd seen how this works. Music, and he wasn't going to be the one caught on the wrong side of the folder this time. So what was the summit actually for? What was that lawyer there to produce? And this is where I have to be honest with you about what's known and what's read between the lines. So, here's the one place I'll flag it clearly. Nobody has published the documents, and the palace has said nothing on the record about what was on the table that day. What follows is assembled from accounts of who was involved and what the summit was reaching toward. Take the specifics as the shape of the thing, not a photograph of it. But watch what the summit was structured to do, because the structure gives away the intent. The summit's real purpose by those accounts was continuity. And I keep coming back to that word because it's the same beautiful soft word that keeps appearing in these stories. Continuity. A word that means keeping things the same. Music, which sounds gentle and responsible until you ask the same for whom. Because what continuity meant here in practice was securing Camilla's position, her arrangements, her standing, a set of understandings about property and role and influence beyond the end of Charles's reign, making the temporary permanent, locking in while Charles was still king and still able to lend his authority to it, a structure that would carry Camilla's place forward into a reign where William, not Charles, would hold the power. And the reason it had to be a summit and not a letter and not a formal legal filing is the clever part. Because a formal legal move would require William's explicit, documented sign-off, and everyone knew he'd refuse it the way he'd refused these moves before. But a family summit, warm and informal, with a lawyer quietly present to witness and record, that could manufacture something softer and harder to undo. The appearance of agreement, consensus in the room, a witness sensed that the family had talked it through, and William had gone along with it. You can't get a signature out of a man who won't sign, but you might in the right room get something a lawyer can later call assent. That was the game. And William saw the board the instant he saw the player. And I want to slow down on what that document or that understanding, that instrument, whatever exact form it took, was actually reaching for, because the specifics tell you why it had to be done this way rather than out in the open. By these accounts, the continuity arrangement bundled together several things that Camilla's side wanted, made durable past the reign. Certainty over which residences and private comforts she'd retain as a widow, a defined and protected role rather than a quiet fading into the background. And this is the part that would have set off every alarm in William's head. Some measure of ongoing involvement or influence in family matters after Charles was gone. Now, think about each of those from William's side. A future king cannot have the previous king's widow holding a locked and pre-agreed claim on residences and roles that he's supposed to control. That's not continuity. That's a mortgage on his own reign taken out before it's even begun by the one person he'd never have chosen to grant it to. And the only time you can secure something like that is now. While Charles is alive, while Charles is king, while Charles's authority can still be used to bless it and make refusing it look like a son being cruel to a dying father's wish. The clock wasn't just pressure. The clock was the whole strategy. Get it locked in before the power changes hands. Because once it changes hands, the answer is no forever. And that reframes the warmth of the room, doesn't it? Because now every soft familial detail of that summit reads differently. The intimate Windsor setting, the family conversation framing, the informal atmosphere. None of it was hospitality. It was all engineering. all designed to lower William's guard to the exact point where he might, in the flow of a warm afternoon with his ailing father, murmur something accommodating that a lawyer by the window could later write down as the moment he agreed. The kindness of the room was the weapon. Music, that's the part that's almost chilling once you see it. They didn't build a hostile environment to corner him. They built the most disarming environment they could because disarming was precisely what they needed him to be. You can't get a signature out of a man who won't sign. But you might in the right room get something a lawyer can later call a scent. And William saw the board the instant he, music, saw the player. And here's the double motivation, because I don't want to flatten this into villains, and honestly this one is genuinely tragic on every side. Start with Camilla because her fear is real and it's human. When Charles dies, Camilla's situation changes overnight and not in her favor. She becomes in effect a dogger, a widow of a former king, holding her title but losing the entire structure of support and standing that existed only because her husband was on the throne. The homes, the influence, the automatic place at the center of things, almost all of it flows from Charles being king. And the day that ends, so does most of it. And her whole future in that new world depends on the goodwill of a man who has never been close to her and has every reason not to be generous. William. So imagine living with that. Imagine knowing that the moment you lose your husband, you also lose your protection, and that the person who then holds your fate is your stepson across a coldness 20 years deep. Of course, she wanted to lock things in while she still could. Of course, her people pushed for a summit. Fear like that doesn't make you a villain. It makes you someone trying desperately to build a wall before the storm you can see coming. And I want to spell out the mechanics of that fear because I think people underestimate just how sharp the drop is for a queen consort who becomes a widow. Right now, Camilla is at the absolute center of the institution. The residences, the staff, the state occasions, the standing. But almost none of that is hers in her own right. It's borrowed. It exists because she is the wife of the reigning king, and it is lent to her in effect by his position. The day Charles dies, that loan is called in. She keeps a title. She keeps whatever personal wealth is genuinely her own. But the vast machinery of being at the center that flows to the new king and the new queen to William and Catherine and Camilla moves overnight from the heart of the family to its edge. That is a brutal transition for anyone, and she has watched up close how this family treats the people who drift to its edge. She's seen what happened to others who lost their central place. So her instinct to secure something permanent isn't greed. It's a woman looking at the cliff she knows is coming and trying while she still has any leverage at all to build something to hold on to on the way down. And there's an extra cruelty in the timing that I think genuinely tormented her. Her leverage only exists while Charles is alive and well enough to lend his weight to her cause. Every day his health is a question. Her window narrows. So she isn't just afraid of the future. She's afraid of the clock. Watching the one source of her protection slowly weaken, knowing that the moment he's gone, so is her ability to arrange anything at all. That's an awful thing to carry. It would make almost anyone reach for a lawyer and a room. It just happened to be the exact reach that a man like William was always going to catch. And Charles wanted to give her that wall. Put yourself in his position, too. Here's a man facing his own mortality with real clarity now, who spent decades fighting to be with this woman, who watched her absorb years of public hatred at his side. And the thing he wants more than almost anything in whatever time he has left is to know she'll be safe when he's gone. That she won't be cast out, diminished, left to the mercy of a court that never fully accepted her. That is not a scheme. That is a husband trying to protect his wife from a future he won't be there to soften. And so by these accounts, he lent his weight to the summit, not as a plot against his son, but as a father and husband trying to solve an impossible equation. How do I protect her when the only person with the power to protect her after me is the one person least inclined to? And then there's William. And here's where the Diana of it all comes in, because you can't understand his reflex without it. William has spent his whole adult life watching this institution try to manage, arrange, and quietly engineer outcomes behind soft words and closed doors. And he has never ever trusted it. Because the last time this family arranged things quietly behind the scenes, managing a situation to protect the institution's comfort, the person on the wrong end of it was his mother. He was 15 when he learned music, in the most permanent way a person can learn anything. What this machine does to the people it decides are inconvenient. And so a room full of soft words, warm framing, and a lawyer hidden by the window is to William not a family conversation. It's the machine doing the thing the machine does, wearing the face of family to do it. His refusal wasn't just legal caution. It was almost an instinct, a lifelong allergy to being managed. He wasn't only protecting his children's future and the line of succession, though he was doing that. He was refusing on a level far below strategy to be handled the way he believes his mother was handled. And I think that's the piece the headline can never capture because it makes William look like the cold one, the man who blew up a family meeting on site, who wouldn't even sit down. But you have to understand what a room like that represents to him specifically. Diana spent the last years of her life convinced, and not without reason, that she was being managed, that decisions about her, arrangements around her, were being made in rooms she wasn't fully institution that had decided how her story was going to go. And her son watched that, absorbed it, and then at 15 walked behind her coffin while the same institution arranged the choreography of her funeral. So when William, decades later, walks into a warm room designed to gently steer him toward an outcome someone else has already decided on with a lawyer positioned to record his cooperation, that is not an abstract legal threat to him. It is the oldest and deepest pattern he knows, wearing a friendly face. His walking out wasn't coldness. It was the opposite. It was a man who feels these things far too much to sit still inside them. And here's the quiet irony that I keep landing on. The very intimacy of the setting Windsor, the family framing come as a son, was meant to reach the sentimental part of him and disarm it. But it reached a completely different part of him instead. Instead of thinking family, he thought machine. Instead of relaxing, he went rigid. The warmth designed to lower his guard is the exact thing that raised it. Because warmth deployed to manage him is the specific trigger his whole life has trained him to distrust. They aimed at his heart and hit his memory. And his memory said, leave. So, walk back through what actually happened in those 60 seconds now that you understand the stakes. The room is set. The framing is warm. Charles is there hoping this finally settles the thing that's been keeping him awake. Camilla is there hoping the wall gets built while there's still time. The lawyer is there, positioned, ready to witness whatever consensus the afternoon produces. And in walks, the one variable the whole plan required and couldn't control. William, and the entire architecture depended on him not noticing what the room actually was on him sitting down, relaxing into the family framing, and letting the afternoon carry him towards something that felt like agreement. And instead he noticed in one glance. The lawyer by the window was the tell, and he read it instantly, and the entire months-long structure collapsed the second he decided not to take his seat. Everything they'd built required his participation, and participation was the one thing he simply declined to give. And what he did next is the part one find genuinely masterful, because it's so restrained. He didn't make a scene. He didn't accuse anyone in front of the room, which would have handed them a grievance, a story about William being paranoid and combative. He didn't give the lawyer anything to witness at all. He simply quietly ended it. The summit is not proceeding, and he left. And think about what that leaves behind. It leaves Charles and Camilla and a solicitor standing in a room that was built for one purpose, now suddenly purposeless. No confrontation to point to, no outburst to leak. Just an empty afternoon and the dawning understanding that he'd seen straight through it. You cannot fight a man who refuses to give you a fight. He denied them the argument as completely as he denied them the agreement. And someone asked me after my last video a question that fits perfectly here. They asked why these royal power struggles so rarely produce an actual blow-up. A shouting match. A scene we can all point to. And this is exactly why. Because the people who are genuinely good at power in this family have learned that the scene is the trap. A confrontation gives your opponent something to work with. A version of events, a grievance, a leak, a story where you're the aggressor. The truly dangerous move is the one that leaves no story at all. William walking out without a word gave the other side nothing to hold. There's no juicy quote, no slammed door caught on a phone, no witness to a William who lost it. Just an absence, a meeting that quietly didn't happen. And an absence is almost impossible to weaponize. You can't leak silence. You can't build a narrative around a man who was perfectly maddeningly calm and simply declined. That restraint isn't weakness in this world. It's the sharpest blade there is. And notice too what his silence protected. If he'd exploded at Camilla in front of the room, he'd have handed her side the perfect counterstory. Poor Camilla, ambushed by an aggressive stepson, humiliated in front of the family. William the bully. Overnight, the victim and the aggressor swap places. And suddenly, the sympathy flows the wrong way. By saying almost nothing, William denied them that reversal completely. He kept himself the man who calmly refused a trap rather than becoming the man who caused a scene. In a family where the story is everything, he protected the story by refusing to give it a dramatic, music middle. That's not instinct. That's discipline of a very high order. You cannot fight a man who refuses to give you a fight. There was, by accounts, a private conversation afterward. William and Charles, no advisors, the version of these things that actually matters. And it was quieter than you'd expect and sadder because Charles reportedly didn't deny what the summit was. He couldn't really. What he did instead was make the case as a father, that he was trying to protect someone he loved, that he wasn't plotting against his son, that he only wanted certainty for Camilla before it was too late. And William, by these accounts, didn't rage at him either. He said something closer to the truth of it, that he understood the fear, that he wasn't without sympathy for it, but that you don't build certainty by engineering a room. That if there was a genuine conversation to be had about Camilla's future, it could be had openly, honestly, with everyone knowing exactly what was on the table and no lawyer hidden by the window pretending to be a guest. What he would not accept was being maneuvered. The problem was never the subject. The problem was the ambush. And there's a line from that conversation that by accounts cut deepest, music, because William reportedly turned his father's own logic back on him. He is said to have asked Charles something like, if this arrangement is fair, if it's reasonable, music, if it's the right thing, then why did it need a hidden lawyer and a disguised room to happen? Why couldn't it withstand being questioned in public? And that's the question there's no good answer to, isn't there? Because a genuinely fair proposal doesn't need to be smuggled in behind a family lunch. You only hide the things that wouldn't survive the daylight. The very secrecy of the method was a confession about the substance. And I suspect that landed hard on Charles because Charles is not a stupid man. And some part of him surely knew walking into that summit that if the plan had been clean, he wouldn't have needed to keep the lawyer off the list. The method gave away that even they didn't quite believe the answer would be yes if they simply asked. And here's the thing that makes it genuinely sad rather than just tactical. I don't think Charles enjoyed any of it. By these accounts, he wasn't a schemer relishing a clever plan. He was a cornered husband who'd let his wife's fear and his own talk him into a method that wasn't really him. And getting caught at it by his own son, having the whole disguised structure exposed in one glance, and quietly refused. I think that shamed him more than any argument could have because it wasn't just a failed plan. It was his son seeing him try to pull something and choosing mercifully not to say so out loud. Sometimes the kindest thing and the most devastating thing are the same act. William not naming it to his face was both. What he would not accept was being maneuvered. The problem was never the subject. The problem was the ambush. And here's a detail that tells you William wasn't just being defensive. He was setting a precedent because after this, according to those close to the household, he made something quietly clear. That any meeting presented as a family conversation would from now on be exactly that. And that legal representation attending in any capacity would have to be disclosed to everyone in advance in writing. In one move, he closed the loophole the entire summit had been built to exploit. He didn't just win the day. He made sure the tactic could never be used on him again. The warm, informal room with the lawyer quietly in the corner. That door is shut now. And that's the real punishment, if you want to call it that. Not a public humiliation. A permanent structural change that quietly strips Camilla's side of the one method that might have worked. Princess and, by some accounts, understood exactly what had happened faster than anyone, and reportedly said as much in that blunt way of hers, that a lawyer at a family meeting was never an accident, and William had been right to walk. And I think Anne's read matters because Anne is the family's great institutionalist, the one who cares most about doing things properly. For her to side with the walkout tells you this wasn't seen internally as William being difficult. It was seen by the person most devoted to the correct way of doing things as the correct thing to do. When the family's own guardian of protocol says you were right to refuse the room was wrong. And there's a deeper reason and would have seen it so clearly. And it's worth drawing out because it explains why she and William keep landing on the same side in these stories. Anne's entire life is built on the principle that the institution has rules, and the rules exist for a reason. That you don't bend the process to get the outcome you want, because the day you do, the process stops protecting anyone. And what the summit represented was precisely a bending of the process, dressing a legal negotiation up as a family chat to get around the fact that the proper open version of that negotiation would fail. To a sneaky, it's corrosive. It's exactly the kind of shortcut that once tolerated eats the institution from the inside. So her siding with William wasn't loyalty to William. It was loyalty to the idea that things must be done properly. And the summit, whatever its emotional justification, was not proper. When the person who cares least about winning and most about the rules tells you the rules were broken, you can take that to the bank. And I think Anne's involvement did something else, too. It gave William cover because on his own, a future king refusing a meeting his father arranged could be spun as a power grab. A son flexing against a weakened dad. But with a respected, neutral, nobody's partisan, quietly affirming that he'd read the room correctly. The interpretation locks in the other way. It becomes not William being difficult, but William being right, confirmed by the one person with no reason to flatter him. In a family where perception is everything, having an on your read of events is worth more than any argument you could make yourself. When the family's own guardian of protocol says you were right to refuse the room was wrong. Of course, it didn't stay inside Windsor's walls because these things never do. Within days, word that a planned family summit had been abruptly canceled began to move. Not the full story, never the full story, but enough. Enough for the commentators to start asking why a carefully arranged meeting of the most senior royals had simply evaporated at the last moment. And the palace did what the palace always does. It said nothing specific, confirmed nothing, denied nothing, and let the silence fill with speculation. And one image did the work that no statement could. Reportedly, photographs of the cars leaving Windsor early, far earlier than a full summit would have run. A convoy departing an afternoon that was supposed to last for hours. An empty schedule where a resolution was meant to be. You can't photograph a plan that collapsed, but you can photograph the cars leaving before lunch. And people who understood the family understood exactly what an early departure meant, and watch how the palace handled the vacuum, because it's a small masterclass in damage control by omission. There was no denial that a meeting had been planned. No confirmation that it had been canceled. No explanation of why. Just a smooth practice nothing. The institutional equivalent of a closed face. And that nothing is deliberate because the palace understands music, something about the public. That we will always fill a silence with a story, and a vague story we invent ourselves is far less damaging than a specific true one they'd have to confirm. So they gave the press an empty space and let everyone paint their own version. A scheduling clash, a health flare-up, a minor disagreement, anything but the real shape of it, which was a future king catching his father's household trying to corner him. The blandness was the strategy when the truth is a family trying to trap its own heir. No comment is the kindest sentence available, but here's what the silence couldn't fully hide. And I think this is why the story had legs. Everyone could feel the mismatch between the scale of the preparation and the abruptness of the end. You don't spend months arranging a summit of the most senior royals for it to evaporate over a scheduling clash. The effort that went in was too big for the excuses that came out. And that gap between how much this clearly mattered and how little anyone would say is exactly the space where speculation breeds. The palace could stop anyone from confirming what happened. It could not stop everyone from sensing that something had. You can't photograph a plan that collapsed, but you can photograph the cars leaving before lunch. So, let me tell you where this leaves everyone. Because the aftermath is quieter and more consequential than the drama. Camilla's continuity plan, the wall she was trying to build while there was still time, is not just delayed, it's exposed. William now knows exactly what her side was reaching for and exactly how they tried to get it. Which means every future approach will be met by a man who's seen the playbook. The soft route is dead. The summit route is dead. What's left for Camilla is the one path she feared most. Having to simply trust in William's goodwill after Charles is gone. The exact vulnerability the whole summit existed to avoid. Charles is left holding a failure he can't really talk about. A last attempt to protect his wife that didn't just fail, but revealed itself. And William is left more firmly in control than before, having demonstrated without raising his voice that the future belongs to him and cannot be pre-written by anyone, no matter how carefully the room is arranged. And I want to be fair about the cost of that, because there is one, and it's the thing I genuinely can't fully resolve. By refusing the room, William also refused the conversation. And there is a real human conversation buried inside all of this that maybe does need to happen. Because Camilla's fear isn't fake, Charles's wish to protect his wife isn't unreasonable. What becomes of a widowed queen consort when the reign ends is a genuine question, and a decent family would want to answer it kindly rather than leave it to the cold mercy of whatever mood the new king is in. So when William walked out, he didn't just defeat a trap. He also arguably slammed the door on the honest version of the same discussion. The one where everyone sits down, no lawyer hidden, and actually works out how to treat Charles's widow with dignity. And the tragedy is that the trap may have poisoned the well for the honest conversation, too. Now that William associates the whole subject with an ambush, how does anyone ever raise it again in good faith? Camilla's people, by trying to force the answer, may have made the fair answer harder to reach. That's the quiet damage under the drama. And that's what I keep circling honestly. Both things are true at once. William was right to refuse to be managed. And the thing they were clumsily, wrongly trying to manage was a real problem that still hasn't been solved. He won the day cleanly. But the underlying question, what happens to Camilla when Charles is gone, is exactly as unanswered now as it was before the summit was ever arranged. All the summit did was prove it couldn't be answered by force. It didn't get anyone closer to answering it by trust. And trust between these two is the one currency that's been in short supply for 20 years. And here's the thought that I keep turning over you, the one that stays with me. Everyone walked into that Windsor summit believing the meeting was the event. Music, it wasn't. The event was William noticing a lawyer by a window and choosing in 1 second not to sit down. The most decisive thing that happened that day was a thing that didn't happen. A meeting that never took place. An agreement that was never reached. A signature that was never even asked for because the man who'd have had to give it walked out first. In this family, the loudest moves are almost never the real ones. The real one was silence and a closed door and a future king who has learned to read a room the way his great relatives once read a folder. And if you want the single lesson buried in all of this, it's that one. In this family, power has almost nothing to do with volume. The loudest person in the room is rarely the one who wins it. The winner is the one who noticed before anyone else what the room was actually for and had the nerve to walk out of it before it could close around him. So, tell me what you think down in the comments. Was William right to blow it all up on sight? Or did he just slam the door on the one honest conversation this family actually needs to have? Because I genuinely go back and forth on it. And if you want to be here when the next quiet move surfaces, because with this family, the summit is never really the story. Make sure you're subscribed. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. If you'd like more of this, I write a free letter every week. Join more than 10,000 royal insiders at crownletter.com. The link's in the pinned comment. If you're watching on your TV, just point your phone at the QR code on screen, and I'll see you there.